So who in the internet has, hello guys, I have anxiety and it's triggering my dyslexia really nice. How are we all doing? Who has played Curse of Strahd?
I'm currently DMing it.
Currently DMing it. So in an interesting game that I ran, I had a character of mine who wanted to play a paladin. And of course the interesting thing is in Barovia, there are only a couple deities that are allowed to have access. So the way we played it is that the Vasanti actually had an old deity that had been tied to them before Strahd came into power, to which made a deal with the devil of, as long as I get to stay with my people, I will give you one potential victim whenever you're bored. And so that is the deal, is that, and he of course wants her favorite. So she is the sort of guiding mark through the team, and say hello to Ashi, my deity from Strahd. Hello everybody, welcome to Creating Pantheons for Roleplay Games. Oh, this has animation. I made this new PowerPoint today. My name is Christine. I am also known as Vicious Cosplay. I have a degree in religious studies, so thankfully running this panel means I actually get to use it. Most of my focus was on Middle Eastern or Southeast Asian cultures, as well as religion. Most of my focus was in Hinduism, Buddhism, or Zoroastrianism is another favorite of mine. I have also been role-playing online, in person for 15 years, and I've also been a DM for quite a long time in 4e and 5e. And I also run events now in Final Fantasy XIV, and I used to do it in World of Warcraft. So, click the thing. So the first discussion we're going to have, there are some seats in the front here. If you have a seat next to you, raise your hand. There we go. Cool, because I know Mag would really bug about standing. So, probably most of you in here, you know what? Raise your hand if you are not from Western Europe or the United States or North America. Congrats, you have Christian culture goggles. So, the thing about Christian culture goggles is it can really impact the way that you look at divinity. It doesn't matter if what your religious upbringing was, where you were brought up, could have went to church, could have hated, the church, all of these different issues. You still grew up in a society that was wrapped around and formed about this ideology, and you deal with it, like we did for the past 3 months, 4 months. When does Christmas start now? So, some of the things that the goggle blockers can do, the Google blockers. You'll probably view deities as all-powerful, perfect, with no flaws, and are usually very demanding. Like, they don't like humans, they think they're stupid, and a lot of other things. There's also the common idea that you have a belief, worship to one deity and one religion, and that's it. Like, that is your chosen path, that is what you do. There's also putting divides between religion, culture, science, and philosophy. I actually did a presentation on this in college, which I called the box theory, and everything has its little box. So the math box goes here, and the science box goes here, and the religion box goes here, and philosophy. So it's not allowed to mix. I also had a philosophy professor in college try to explain something out of Theravada Buddhism without using the actual terms in Buddhism to explain it, and the class could not understand it because they were trying to avoid the religious connotation. There's also, you only have like one means of respecting divine in constant worship. Like, this is the formula you're supposed to use in order to worship or pay respect. And then one of the biggest ones, which I see a lot in the D&D and other tabletop community, is If it's pre-Christian, it's dead. Like, it doesn't exist anymore. We study it in elementary school, and it doesn't exist anywhere else in the world. You'll probably notice during my presentation I use deities and divinity and not gods and goddesses. This is my personal preference. I like it because deity is a gender-neutral term. Also, God as a word to describe anything with divine or transcendence was actually really recently adapted, probably within the last 500 years maybe. And it's a primary thing in the West. The analogy that I also use to is that you're calling all men John and all women James because John was once a very, very popular name. So, for making a pantheon, these are the steps we're going to go through. We're going to figure out when, so the time period of your history, how many, are you looking at monotheism, polytheism. Also, I have an email at the end of it if you want to request for these slides. So you can screenshot that. And I know MAGFest is also recording this. So that's cool. Thank you, MAGFest. There's also the interactive versus the clockmaker. Is your pantheon still around, or are they done with the world? My favorite part, the creation story, making the foundation for your pantheons, how they impact the current culture of your mortals or immortals or everything in between, and also how they connect with the people and the people connect with them. So the first one is when. At what point in history is your setting for your game or your story? First thing I want to also reveal, the concept of religion is really, really new. So that idea of like, oh, are you a Christian? Are you a Buddhist? Are you a Hindu? I have spoonerism, and I'm really good at doing that when I'm anxious. But yeah, that's about a 800-year-old sort of concept. Usually the way that it would look at is not that there was a certain sect of followers, it was how do you believe the world works? You know, so what is the name of the ball in the sky? Is it Ra? Is it Apollo? How is, do your mountains have certain names? Why is it that the wind blows? Why is it that we have thunderstorms? So that is the way that people interacted with the divine. It was also really heavily tied to the culture and the place and the times. It's one of the reasons why Christianity is so segmented the way it is because it doesn't have like an actual grounding to where it is. It is an ideology that's above the land, but not with the land. You'll see in a lot of cultures that are primarily not Western, that they may take pieces of, the old, the ancients that they respected, the different divinities, spirits that they respected, and it will move with them. If you have a seat next to you, please raise your hand. Those are for you guys, because I know standing room is not liked. Unless you just want to stand back there. That's cool. For example, there's a temple I really love that's in Carmel, New York, that's Chongyan Monastery. First of all, it has the largest Buddhist on the Western Hemisphere, but also all around the lands you will see the sort of spirits and the divinity from initially where they came from out of Japan. Is it Japan or China? No, it is China. So it is all of their local divinity that they had, that they respected there, that they just traveled with them and brought to the land that they're living on now. Another thing to think about, because this is a common one, how do your people or your divinity interact with the concept of science? In a current state, science has become something that adds doubt, in which people tend to not like. This usually adds to fearing alternatives. Currently, one of the biggest impact I can think of is Jainism, in which they starkly believe that the world is flat, and they will not look at photos coming from anything from outer space or anything like that, because that is their belief that the world is flat. And Jainism is really, really strict in their beliefs. So There's also older conservative dogma and philosophy that might refuse to adapt or change to the times, so they may struggle with holding the belief of their local people, or holding the belief, or especially bringing in people to believe what they believe. This does not mean that science and religion can't mix. I highly advise not doing it because it's a really just boring modern concept to begin with. And many cultures do have a very fluid mix of religion, science, and philosophy. In some religions, like Hinduism, the philosophical texts are actually considered more important than the actual dogma texts. So they look more at the what-if questions than they do this is the answer. So, as I said before, when is your game? So, is it pre-science and does it have restricted movement, aka people are not traveling about, or you may have a nomadic group? Usually in this sense, belief is local, and it generally describes the way their local area works. That is definitely the locked point of, this is how I define my surroundings. Usually the other way they look at it is that divinity can kind of be the very powerful neighbors. If you look at the Greeks in this way, the Greek Pantheon was definitely like, that is Mount Olympus, and they live up there, and we don't go there, because it's scary. And then one of the heaviest focuses of that time is, what is the afterlife? What happens, especially since older times, lifetimes were a lot shorter, so it becomes, what it happens when I die. If you're going into Middle Ages-ish, you start getting more of the passage of ideals, you get more conversations between different groups of people, but again, it's sort of that divine structure. You may have times in which lore is lost to time, aka, it could be civilizations collapsed, it could be that certain people who told stories are dead, it could be telephone. This is usually the time when organized religion starts to grow, and that is because of that mixing of cultures, and now you're getting conflicting groups that are putting divides between them. If you're doing a modern day one, we have a following of religion is the most common language. This is when you really start to see atheism and secularism. Especially since all of us in here grow up in a very secular culture. You also lose, again, as people move around, you start losing those local stories, and especially divinity and belief in colonized areas. The number one killer of any sort of divinity. If you're starting to go forward, more futuristic, usually by that point it would be assumed that you've lost any sort of foundational culture to your land. Everybody is everywhere, people aren't staying in the same place for long, could be futuristic that people are in outer space. So now you have more interesting ideas of what are you doing with divinity when you are not in your homeland. Definitely new religions and new connections are forming, again, the melting pot. But also, it's the future is yours, you can do what you want. One of my favorite ones I like to talk about, and which people usually don't do in these sort of games, is what is divinity like in post-apocalypse? This can be full of a bunch of ideas that you could make use of. Usually it could be the complete transformation of previous beliefs. It could be clinging to them to the point of cultism. A lot of it would be assumed you have the divinity idea is this is divine punishment and this is what's happening because of XYZ thing. And then you could also have just new sorts of divinity that come out of the chaos. And it's well, we don't actually see the sun anymore, but we blame this one for the fog that's going over all the time and weird things like that. So definitely modern, postmodern, and post-apocalyptic does not mean that religion dies. It can just become really, really interesting. So how many? How big is your pantheon? Does it have a type of definition? The most common ones you probably know are monotheism. You have one overarching powerful deity. fun story, Christianity is technically not a monotheism. You have polytheism, which is multiple deities of varying strengths and domains. Polytheism is kind of the good umbrella once you have more than one overarching divinity. The one that you're thinking of that Christianity technically is monolatry and henotheism. It's the belief in multiple deities, but you only worship the one. So Christianity is the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, but we look at God as our main one. But the trio is still as equally as important. There's also dualism, in which you have two forces that are always fighting with each other. Zoroastrianism is very big in this one. One I usually never see people do, and it's a fun one to mess with, is pantheism, is the creator no longer technically exists. Made the universe, made the foundation, and is either gone or is a mindless entity of the universe. I'm going to do this again. Raise your hand if you have a seat next to you to see if anybody wants to sit down. There are also seats in the front if you are brave. I know I'm a cat divinity, but it doesn't mean I'm going to steal your tongue. And there's also many more like this. There's a plethora of different names for divinity archetypes that you could use. So the other big thing that usually people mix up is the monotheism versus the polytheism. So monotheism, again, is the belief in one deity over all others. You'll have demi-deities who are all powerful, but usually never surpass the main one. And of course, I mentioned the Trinity. Polytheism is a belief in various levels of power. Usually monotheism does not have a hierarchy. It doesn't have a top-bottom approach. It could have a family line. So you have deities that have various domains that they control, places they're from. Worshipping each divinity might be different than worshipping another one. The hierarchy might also not matter to strength. So for example, Shiva is the creator and the destroyer and considered to be the all-powerful of any of the divinity in Hinduism. But Kali Ma still kicked his ass. So again, polytheism, an analogy I like to do, the bad one is polytheism is like a fighting game. There are lots of characters, but you choose one, and that's it, and that's your game one, and you're good. That's your divinity. Polytheism is better explained like Pokemon. There are lots of them. They all have different skills. They're all tied to different things. You might have a core team that you're connected to, ones that you like for each other, but it doesn't mean that you are locked in place. You may reach out to another one in time of need. And then the other really terrible example I have is that demi-deities and saints can be considered DLC, and this is really cringe. It's not mandatory, but it can be really fun when you're creating your pantheon. So, quick moment, do I have any questions before I move on to 3? Blue, my dude here in the blue, yes.
You mentioned time, like when you were going over the time periods. Now, there's a lot that we can't know about what people believe, say, prior to the advent of writing, just because of how little, just because of how little there is to go on after 10,000, 20,000, 30,000 years. Do you have any idea about, say, doing something for that kind of setting?
Have fun. Literally, I would say have fun for that one.
Okay.
I got yellow shirt back here.
Yes, so you mentioned at a certain point about demi-deities. You refer to them as all-powerful, but still not as, or maybe revered as other deities higher in the Pantheon.
Right.
So, I guess then, I guess what I just wonder is, if demi-deities are all powerful, then aren't they also revered to the same extent?
Because you're further away, I'm going to repeat the question. The general question was, why would a demi-deity that is all-powerful not be considered as revered? Generally, that's up to the people to come up with that. So, for example, Hercules is all-powerful. He's just as strong as his dad. He is not considered at the same level. He would still be considered a demi-deity in comparison to his parents in that regard. So that's definitely one in which would be a culture-based how people would think about it. Does that work?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
Can I just add to that real quick?
Okay.
So the way I was thinking of it is, like Hercules might be all powerful because he's strong, but then Zeus has age, he has more political power,
Right.
he knows more people, so that's also how you could look at different like power levels too.
He has a bigger resume.
Yeah.
He has a bigger resume and a bigger fan base.
Yes.
So, all right, I'm going to move on for time. So here or gone, how do your divinity interact with mortals right now? So the three that I usually consider is the friendly. So this is the Pantheon that are the next door neighbors, or can literally be the neighbor. They might frolic in the mortal world disguised as mortals or different entities, or they may just walk around as themselves, and everybody is like, oh my God, that's divine right there. It might be possible to visit their realm. Then there are the unseen watchers, so they may not have any direct interaction with mortals. They might live on a separate plane and watch from there with very little interaction. That's commonly in which you'll see people, they might use some sort of saint or demi-deity or angel or whatever in order to have the communication with mortals. And then there is the clockmaker. The clockmaker created the universe, so they made the foundation for your world or your area and are currently no longer present. They built the clock and they let it to tick on its own. Sometimes it could be they just left, they were destroyed in the process, or they walked away. I said that already. Or they might actually be part of the universe now and they just no longer have that consciousness. Which leads up to my favorite part, the creation story. How did your universe or your world or your area come to be? So creation stories are the foundations for any pantheon. You are really not going to understand what the framework is or how to describe it to your players unless you figure out how the world became. And you could be really creative with it. I definitely would advise looking for any sort of religion out of the Middle East, like 10K, like especially looking out of, and also in Africa, to look at the way that they have their creation stories, because it can be really funny too. Again, they help explain the way the world works with the help of the divine. So it sets the foundation of how things evolved after creation, or how they might be interactive or unactive in your world. Again, if you're going with something that's more polytheism and you like to do I have the divinity of fire and water, this can really help you found like, okay, why are they this? How do they control that? Why might my people like them or really dislike them? Are they a terrible person? It can also really help to establish lineages, such as if there is any sort of family that goes down it. Please note that incest is totally normal and totally okay in divinity, and that's just the thing. There is a huge thing that I love that laugh. There was a huge thing in the recent raids in Final Fantasy XIV when people were discovering that two siblings that one was an older brother and a younger sister gave birth to three other divines, and it's like, no, the lore is that they loved each other so much that these two burst into existence. Like they just literally existed. Stop sexualizing everything. Anyway, but honestly, you should make creation stories because they can be really fun. And it can really unlock some fun ways for you to think about magic, monsters, why your kingdoms are in certain places, why your players should care. It's just fun. Before I go into more mortal things, I'm going to take a couple extra questions. You had one up.
Do you have an example in a extant culture where the creation process destroys the divinity?
Do I have an example of where the creation process destroys the divinity? There are a couple out of Africa. Depending on what timeline you're looking in Egyptian religions, that is an example of it. Probably the best thing I would do, there are a bunch of books of people who have written about the clockmaker, and they usually have good examples of that. Also, you'll probably stumble on an author who did this really good book on this, in which he was a well-renowned physicist, a whole string theory physicist, and he decided to become a priest and really loves to look at the creationism of the world. Like, it's really fascinating. So,
What is the name of that book or author?
I cannot remember because I have ADHD. This person in the back. Yes, you.
Hi. Okay, so the three examples you used, like how your pantheon interacts with this was friendly, clockmaker, and like a watcher, right?
Yeah.
So are there any where the pantheon is like passively hostile? Like is it passive or is like actively like messing with their population?
She's still active.
I could say that falls under the friendly. It's just the unfriendly. The unfriendly pantheon. They are messing with those people. I'm going to go with leaning out into the... Yes.
Hi, sorry, I can't actually see you doing it head on. I actually like that you brought up Final Fantasy 14 because of the nature of the raid. Spoilers for anybody who's the Alliance raid in Walker 14, how the 12 all interact with they are the watchers, watching humanity, they're accepting their prayers and everything, but as a result of the mortal's actions, the warrior of light, they become the clockmaker, where they all merge into this one being and are finally set free by your actions. And it's not really going to be explored because it's an MMO we're talking about, but I do like the idea that divinity can change in that way.
Right.
Do you know if there's other examples?
So what he was talking about is that in Final Fantasy 14, the 12 that is the divinity, you learn through the latest raid series that their appearance and their powers and a lot of what they do was impacted by the prayers and the thoughts of the people. The monkey is happy. That is the only thing that was good that came out of that raid series. It should have been a DBZ fight. Like, that would have been fun. I have a lot of angry feelings about this. But that is a really good and easily Googleable one on if you want to have something that impacts, having the mortals impacting the image or how your divinity works. I'm going to continue on. Because it is time o'clock. So, interacting with mortals, how do they represent your world and its people? So, in terms of representing the world, we've talked about the elemental ones. It could be associated with overseeing certain physical, emotional, or spiritual domains. I usually, again, language thing, I find it to be better to think less of deity of and more deity is thing. Because again, that gives a more creationism connection of like, okay, I have a divinity who is the controller of fire, and everything that he is based around, including his really bad rage issues, is based out of his control and being of fire. You could have a physical manifestation or connection with the elements in the world. I'm just going to throw out another one from my pantheon. So my favorite one is Tect, and he is of rock, and he is a giant mountain, and the people can accidentally walk into his mouth, and that's usually how he gets followers. He is the creator of the physical world, and he pushed all of the mountains together, and yeah, he's soft-spoken and likes to talk in little poems, and it's really great. You could also have the natural elements be considered them or part of them. I have already mentioned the big ball in the sky divinity. It could be something like this divinity lives in the sea, and all of the fish that came out of the sea are their kids. All of them. You could also have worship in a physical representation. So this is kind of going back to the conversation we had of like mortals came up with the appearance of what the divinity looked like. The common ones are statues and figures. You could also have physical items be considered actually part of the deities or be them themselves. So those followers taking care of them might bathe or dress them. They may bring them food, and it could be if the family's eating at the same time, they might have a private space for them. For example, Krishna's birthday is like absolutely crazy because the temples who fall around Krishna on his birthday, they make a lot of desserts because he has a sweet tooth and he is obsessed with butter. And so you go to the temple and there is enough sweets to feed several hundred people. But that's his food. And he has his food and then everybody else can enjoy it afterward. Biggest thing, please avoid the word idolatry. It has been used as an insult through that idea of false idols. Honestly, at this point, it could be considered a slur, so please, please avoid, even if you're doing something evil in your campaign that has someone use that word, like, I still would avoid it. There could also be the appearing amongst mortals. We touched on this a little bit. So the divine might have one or multiple forms. There could be their true appearance. That could be how they perceive themselves, how the mortals perceive themselves. They could disguise themselves around mortals how they wish, take on every form, you know, like a swan or a bull. Everyone in the audience laughs, thank you. They could appear as a humanoid or an animal or an object or a giant mountain where you can wander into his mouth, things like that. They may use these appearances to have fun with mortals, and we're not going to go back to the swamp. You have a lot of things. Here is my biggest warning. If you give your divinity a physical form, you are going to want fan art. You are going to want it, so make sure you get artists in your campaign. All right, so now we're doing connecting with the people as in the ritual part. How do mortals reach out to the divine? The common one is worship. The biggest reason why we know worship is, again, we are a Christian culture, and this is what we were unintentionally or intentionally brought up on. They could be set into certain requirements within the dogma. A lot of the ones that are known, you could have a dress code, washing certain scents. Like, so for example, perfumeries in Egypt were a common thing that were done to the priests before they were able to enter the center of the temple to do their worship. There might be a language you specifically have to speak with. Giving of fits. Giving of gifts, such as food, riches, knowledge, lives, and he could have rituals of varying levels of specificity. You also, again, could have these practices made by mortals or made by the divine. Another warning, if you make your dogma and especially your rituals way too heavy, that might require micromanaging on both behalf of you and your players. So if they want to get into that, you can give them those tools, but definitely do not make it a gaming mechanic, in which I will address later. There is also respect and adoration, which is honestly the most common that anybody do with their divinity. So the deities are commonplace enough that worship isn't required, aka dogma of certain rules and stuff, but they are given the respect for the power that they hold and the importance of what they did for the world around them. Again, it may refer to the pantheon, like powerful, rich neighbors who may or may not deserve respect. They might be welcomed into homes via, I just use in real life physical representation and treated like a family member. Fun example, my professor in college has a giant Buddha head, and he specifically has 2 figurines that are there to protect the Buddha, and they are fighting Buddhas. And so the joke is that if you try to tease the Buddha head in his office, the figurines will punch you in the face. There also could be the mutual understanding. So this starts to narrow the gap of how separate your divinity are for your mortals. So they might not be given high respect or praise, but, they exist. They're there. They live there. This is really commonplace in older societies where deities are tied to nature, or the working class was considered too low, and that also goes through transcendence of any sort of locals, especially reverence of the dead who may have been risen to higher power. The fun example I like to do is, especially looking at like Irish folklore, is we don't go on that hill because they live up there. And they're drunks and their parties are crazy, and it's like, I don't want to deal with that. There could also be multiple practices of connecting with the divine, but it could change depending on the divinity or the titles they hold, or how the mortals are going to revere them. Generally, in that point, common folk are considered to be too low for respect, and that is depending on if you have that sort of social hierarchy built in as well. And that's, again, usually decided by those of higher social hierarchy. And again, people of power may establish practices to control the populace with or without the support of the pantheon. All right, before I go into the do nots, do I have a couple questions? You've already asked a question. Oh, okay. But I see a gloved hand. Stand up for me, please.
Since this is for like D&D and tabletop games, how do you run into how do you deal with the old precedent of the party has to take out this evil that's threatening the world, but we can't have the gods step in because then the party can't do anything?
Can you repeat that but louder?
All right.
Yeah. There is a lot of noise through here, so.
No worries. So how do you deal with there is a threat to the world, perhaps even the universe, that the heroes, the adventuring party has to deal with, but then say there's gods of goodness, that gods of good heroes that are supposed to take care of that kind of thing. So basically, how do you deal with a god that can step in, snap your fingers, and solve all the problems, and still let the players have agency?
So the Eagles allegory, that is, okay.
Yes, exactly.
So, the question is, why doesn't the divinity step in on behalf of it? It could be laziness. It could be that it is a problem that they consider beneath them. It could be that entire thing of, maybe mortals should have this challenge to it. Maybe they actually don't have the power to do it too. Because that was the thing in Final Fantasy 14. Well, the universe is ending. Why doesn't the 12 interact? And it's like, well, it's because they're tuxedo masks, so that's the problem. Your divinity is tuxedo mask. I'm just going to be evil. How many 14 players do I have in this room? Okay, I at least have a few people who understand the tuxedo masks.
Or I guess for God of Realms, there's Ao, who's like the god of the gods, that's like, no, you can't interfere because...
Yeah, and there could be the boss of the boss that says, you don't touch what the mortals are doing. It could be that. All right, I am going to go with oh, it's a leopard print. Could you stand up, because they did get louder over there.
So I do have a lot of games in D&D, and something I struggle with is that in D&D, the gods are known. People know they exist. It is a fact of life. How do you think that continues with the morality of the world?
So the question was that D&D has its own structured pantheon, and how does that deal with the morality of the world? I really think that falls under the how do you play with that pantheon and how do you do it yourself? Because, a lot of us, we still take a lot of flexible bounds of what you're doing with the story. They gave you the baseline, and this is an idea. it isn't like the book also telling you that it's okay to take Greek pantheon and use that. Yeah, so that's something I think falls under too. What is the societies that are interacting with this, and how do you want your players to perceive, or how do your players want to perceive those? It can be really flexible in either direction. Does that answer the question?
Yeah.
Okay. So, hey honey, what's the time? 6:09. Okay. One more. You.
First of all, praise tact. I'm sold.
I like the name.
And secondly,
I didn't even think of that. I just did
Amazing.
a random ass word. Oh my god. Text sounds great. All of my divinity were just me saying words out loud and going like, oh, that sounds great.
there's probably linguistic implications there.
I just love that. Now I have a reason. I have to tell my player now. Anyway, I'm sorry.
Oh, all good. I was wondering if you could characterize, I'm going to try to be coherent, like the level of fragmentation of domains of a polytheist pantheon.
Infinite. Like you can. So, for example, Hinduism has over 100,000 divinity as part of it, and a lot of that is also because the country is huge, and all the surrounding areas are huge to that too. But B, it again goes back to this is the hierarchy of the comet, and then these are the local ones we know, and this has been passed around for generations, and now that the world is evolving, we have new ones to represent those. So you can split up the domain as much as you want, but where? You have to remember that, which I think I actually have in this. So I'm going to move on to things to avoid. The first one is the assumption, and I mentioned this before, older religions like Greek, Egyptian, and Norse are no longer around or practiced. I don't remember what the 5th edition was. I know the 4th edition book does have pages dedicated to here are some alternative pantheons that you should be using with, that grade school knowledge that you picked up in school, and which is very bad because the truth is that those religions and that folklore is always there. It never fully disappears. Even if it has been changed in a way from the baseline or if that overarching religion doesn't exist anymore, it's still present. For example, the Sphinx in Egypt is still a revered deity, even though the surrounding area is completely Muslim at this point. It is still a local deity to which people still interact with, and that is specifically why one really rich guy who really didn't like the fact that all of these local farmers were revering the Sphinx cut off the statue's nose. That is how the nose was lost. Napoleon was not involved in it. It was one rich guy who then got hung for doing that.
Okay.
So when you don't have the ties or the culture like actually connecting to anything that you're trying to use as if, like you're trying to use Greek specifically as your pantheon, you're going to lose a lot of depth to it. You're going to lose a lot of the culture significance. It's going to be very top level, and honestly, it's really insulting to that. It's cultural appropriation at the end of the day, even if it's meant to be fiction. Again, as I mentioned before, size limitations. You have to remember your pantheon. Your players don't, but you do, and if you make a mistake, you know they're going to tease you about it. Because there's going to be that one person that has more notes than you do. And large dynamic pantheons can be really great for games, but again, they can really overwhelm your players, especially Western players who are not really used to actually revering, anything that is out of their normal domain. Also, choice anxiety. I have choice anxiety. That bullet is for me. This was actually something I interacted with, which is specifically why I made this panel. So I was helping with a game in which they decided they wanted to make their own divinity and have it be a game mechanic. And it went poorly. So little bonuses, like you get a +1 to intelligence if Like, if you like tech, you're really good at inspecting rock. You're really good at that. Those are great. The more that you start adding bonus points, such as, like lots of extra XP, or you get a special ability, or you get all of these things, that could mean that your player is connecting with that divinity for min-maxing purposes. They're not there in for the role play, they're there for the bonus points. And then again, it diminishes the idea of your infinite being for bonus points. And then there could be the micromanaging of it to the players, which also means micromanaging for you. The game I was interacting with actually had it so micromanaged that if a player who was following a certain divinity did not do certain actions, he lost religion points, in which affected his attack power. And if he did certain things correctly, it did better. But like, this was a turn-by-turn problem. It was horrible. I nuked that thing for months. All right, bonuses round. Cool stuff. Mortal representatives, we've talked about this before. Do you have anything? Halaf. Thanks, Google. Are there people working on behalf of the Pantheon? This could include saints, high religious figures, reincarnates. You might have children of the divinity that are now part of the mortal world. They may or may not be immortal themselves. Someone who is deemed important directly through signs of the divine, or they made that up and everybody believes them. So you can think about how these people came to this title, this power, and then of course how the populace thinks of them. Ooh, excuse me. Holidays and natural phenomena. Do you have any world events that are used to celebrate a deity in a certain respect? Do you have any sort of thing that might be in mourning of those mortal figures? Could it be something of importance, like we have a thing that's cool because this deity was born this day, to this deity made this diet, and that's important. And of course, do they affect the natural world, such as natural disasters, odd weather patterns, changes in the states of the moon, the seasons changing, and it could be something as small as this divinity is why the flowers bloom, this is why birth happens the way it is, this is why cats exist. It could be as simple as that. Also think about, if you want, places of worship, especially if you're going to have somebody who's dedicated, who wants to do worship ideology. Temples, so maybe a singular spot dedicated to one or multiple deities. A holy land, so it could be cities or large spans of land that's considered sacred. Home shrines, so small locations used by a single person or a family. Sacred spots, so it may not have a visual indication that it's important, but it's considered to be divine by the locals or others. And it could also be the time of day is dedicated to this divinity. And there could also be culture conflicts. Do mortals have arguments over deities, dogmas, or practices? Could this conflict be preferences when it comes to particular divinity of a pantheon, and maybe religion, the idea of religion altogether? Could be the arguments between who is the mortal representative of your divinity. And it could just be people being mean and cherry-picking parts of lore or dogma or philosophy for evil reasons. Biggest warning, keeping track of your players on how they interact when they start to reflect this divinity is very, very good. There should be out-of-character conversations so that your issues in-game do not become issues out of game. It's very weird how that can bleed, and I have seen it before. And then I'm going to tell you a fun story about how Transcendence can be anything. And it's called the Transcendent Moose. This is my favorite story from college. So my religious professor has a summer home up in Vermont. He went out to get his mail one day, and there was a moose in his driveway. He had never seen a moose in his life. And now it was only a few yards from him, a full adult-sized moose. They stared at each other for over a full minute. And then the moose left. And he had this moment of awe, just looking at this large, miraculous creature and having this connection with them that felt above himself in the moment. And so my example for this is anything can be transcendent and anything can be divine and anything can give you that interaction, which means you can have fun with your pantheon doing that as well. So this is the end. If you want to get a copy of the slides, please take a screenshot of that email. What is the time, honey? 6:20. Okay, I have about 5 minutes for questions. You had raised your hand before and you were in front of me.
So, when you're making the, like...
Louder. Thank you for those who came. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
So, like, when you're doing with how models are going to be interacting with gods or making the religion...
You want to come closer because you are very soft.
Is this any better?
Yes.
So when you're making the religion or planning how humans interact with your god or gods, how do you avoid slipping into a culturally Christian mindset? I.e., most religions have rules. Pretty sure most religions tell you can't kill someone, but how do you deal with something like wrongdoing in a religion? Or
So the easiest way to do that, and that is, you can find the foundation of the idea of pantheon going back to, oh God, what was it called? Hammurabi Code. The Hammurabi Code is probably considered to be the first in-depth laws of what sins are. And the big reason why they did that is that they could not figure out a way to punish the populace in a way to keep them from doing wrongdoing. So what was the greatest threat? Death. Because at the time, there was no concept of an afterlife. And so they used death as that motivator of like, you know, you don't want to do this because you don't want to die. So usually when you start thinking of those ideas, you're looking for what is the biggest threat that something can do to your people in order to do that. Your pantheon could also have someone who isn't nice. That's totally allowed, and it could be, you know, against the sort of pantheon. I specifically have that in my own, in which I have a light divinity and a dark divinity, and the basic issue is the dark one is always ignored because there's a mirror world and nobody wants to go to the Underdark. So she has gone like, man, I'm going to try to make everything dark because I'm bitter. And she doesn't care what her followers do to get there. But also it could be there is no judgment. It is just existence. Tech does not do judgment. It's life. Life goes on the way it is, and you do what you need. Just love rock.
Stone is stone is stone.
Stone is stone is stone is stone. Thank you. Do I have any more questions? Yes, you, sir.
So famously, in the time of troubles, Mistra was killed and replaced. How do you deal with bad gods and bad gods and their persistent divinity?
So how to deal with dead gods. So I actually have an example of this from my divinity. Specifically in my creation story, I used 10-dimensional theories. There was one divinity who existed in nothingness and went, I want to hear a story. And so he made the different actors and players in order to formulate a story and then stepped away and just watched the way the world worked. People know of them, they might not know of them, but it is literally at the scope that they're more myth than a well-known thing. My brain went in circles. I don't know if that answered your question. I know there was another part and I missed it.
Just how you deal with the persistent divinity. So like if I said one of the goddesses was killed, basically summon a calamity, but her worshippers still keep her power of divinity like in the world, but the goddess themselves is dead. So have you seen any other similar examples?
No, but I like that concept. The fact that the power of the divinity still lives, even though there isn't a conscious connection to it anymore. That actually kind of falls under the clockwork theory too. But this person has a thought to it too.
I answered that because I actually have that. Most of my gods are kind of like dead, but more or less they don't exist. But but the ideals that they represented still exist.
Right, the ideology through the mortals is technically more powerful than the divinity ever will be.
Yes.
And that's kind of the way that I think about it. So it is cool, like I really like the idea that it's just like, it still is structured and works that way, even though they're gone.
Oh, like, do you have like a Warhammer 40k or something like that?
So while they're having that conversation, you, sir.
So I have a divinity, his name is Arden, but he was just a normal guy. And he got transcended into the highest being that there is, which is the void God.
As he did.
Like makes reality like work. It holds it together. But he can't be conscious as a person and be the void God. So he has to either sacrifice something like his power over all of reality, or he has to kind of be nothingness and sit in that. So what he did is he found other kind of beings of lower power and started bringing them into kind of this company to kind of install a safety system into all the different realities and things so that they can function without him.
Congratulations, you made demi-deities.
Right, and so my problem here that I have is that because of the way the system works, a lot of people or things can suddenly transcend, or if they reach a certain level of power in an idea, they can transcend. So how do you let's say a tree transcends into the deity of trees, how does that kind of work if trees already exist?
There is now just a deity of trees. You could literally just have it be that way at that point.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, you could just go the stupid simple route of like, how is it that no one has gotten to this point yet? Because no one has gotten to this point yet.
Have you read the Tamara Pierce books?
No, because you know I don't read.
That's fair. So Tamara Pierce is a fantasy author, and she does something similar in one of her series where the main character's mother, spoilers, sorry, you don't find out until a little bit later